With Update 3.0, Wuthering Wavess launched the region of Lynae, going back to the game's sci-fi aesthetic, albeit with a more optimistic tone. My overall opinion on this patch is that 3.0 is a great introduction for a new region. I enjoyed it for its cast of new characters, interesting combat and exploration mechanics, and a great open world that is fun to explore. But on the other hand, this patch has a flawed main quest, little open world narrative, and a bunch of technical issues. Now that we're done with the summary, let's move on to the rest of the video. I'll split it into a few parts focusing on presentation, writing, combat mechanics, and exploration. .0's main quest starts out strong. Chisa meets the rover and shorekeeper in the cafe in preparation for their journey to Lynae. Unfortunately, the QTE dialogue options come up again, and I've already made it clear why they sucked in 2.7, so I won't repeat that here. Other than that, the intro is fine. The pair make their way through the portal, arriving in Lynae at different times. This will be important later. Next, we have a beautiful cutscene that incorporates a pleasant color palette, camera work, and audio. This introduction is great because it introduces the featured character, a dangerous threat that all characters have to deal with, and the region in which the conflict takes place. Lynae is immediately given some mystique with the shooting of an alleged Frexidus agent, and her behavior while alone contrasts with her attitude when she meets the rover. I'll expand on this when talking about Lynae. The first area the player visits is Startorch Academy. The first part of the main quest heavily features Lynae and her interactions with other characters, namely her teachers. There is a lot of good dialogue here, and most of the scenes serve to introduce characters or ideas. The academy itself looks like a planet from afar, and the interior is just as beautiful. It features motifs such as rotating rings and scales, and although it suits the place and helps it stand out among other cities in the game, I think they were used on a bit too many objects. Startorch Academy is pleasant to look at because it features a nice color palette, a mix of futuristic holographic displays and old-school sci-fi monitors, upbeat music, and lively NPCs. It's immersive because of the NPC interactions and dialogue. It's also nice to know that the teachers have hobbies like the Peaks of Prestige card game and, for Mornye's case, racing Lynae during her free time. Additionally, the academy sells the aesthetic of a college fantasy with a focus on 1960s and 1970s space exploration, both of which carry a great deal of optimism and nostalgia at their core. The more time I spend here, the more I appreciate it and the sadder I get, and that's because everyone says that adult life sucks, leading to me being nostalgic for my school days from the very day I graduated from my game design course. Many adults tend to look back upon simpler times the same way, and I think that includes at least some of the developers driving them to design the academy in this manner. The uniforms also fit the setting very well. It is interesting to see the difference between the NPC's uniforms and Chisa's outfit, which I'll assume to be the academy's old uniform. Though it is strange how the rover and Chisa were not given the new uniform, and how Lynae's uniform looks so different from the ones the NPCs wear. On another note, the ID card that the rover receives during 3.0's main quest is different from the old one that he or she receives from Chisa in 2.8. After all, a lot can change in 20 years, at least in this universe, and the difference between the uniforms and ID cards are good ways to showcase this. I think it would have also been nice if there was an option to show the rover's old ID card during registration, just to see the reactions of the teachers. In terms of playable space, the academy is quite well made. The verticality and layered level design finally makes tools such as elevators useful again. The inability for players to fly necessitates the use of such tools, as well as creativity when traversing the region, and the academy gives players the first taste of that potential. The teleporter network was just okay though. Some of them are very useful while others are quite pointless. Also, the floors are inverted in the map, that is, the ground floor is on the top of the list in the GUI. It's a bit strange to say the least. Overall, Startorch Academy looks amazing, and it was a great choice to have it be the first place the player visits when they arrive in the region. The rest of Lynae looks great as well. The area features a wide spectrum of colors that are mostly used in smart ways, and the 5 landmarks, that being Startorch Academy, Starward Riseway, the Space Trek Observatory, the Stationary Sun, and the tower on the southern part of the map, can be seen from most areas, which help the player orient themselves during exploration. When traveling around, I found many locations with beautiful vistas, and one of the greatest highlights is of me discovering the Roya Woods. Without the ability to fly, the developers can force or otherwise encourage players to approach new areas from specific directions and engineer breathtaking vistas like this one. The motorcycle and other exploration tools, which I will touch on later, fit well with the advanced technology that the Space Trek Collective employs throughout the region. Taking advantage of the artificial weather system, the developers chose to let players change the weather after some progress. This makes sightseeing more convenient, and it is a welcome addition if only for aesthetic purposes. On another note, it is interesting that most of the region features large rock formations with patterns etched onto them, suggesting that some ancient civilization had once used them for astrological calculations. For those familiar with Risk of Rain 2, this may look familiar. Overall, the entire region is breathtaking. The strongest aspect of Wuthering Wavess has always been the presentation, and the game's environments have always been breathtaking since launch. Lynae, of course, is no exception. I'll end the presentation section with my impressions of the NPCs. As usual, the designs for notable NPCs are interesting and rivals the designs of some playable characters. Dalifa stands out as she uses a talking robot to convey her thoughts, and her outfit fits very well with her hair. Iris is cute, and part of her design takes inspiration from, I believe, classic Japanese TV ghosts. It looks like her animations are played in both 2D and 3D, allowing parts of her body to stick out of the screen while the rest is presented on the screen as a flat texture. I've not seen a game do this before, especially not with a simple NPC, so it came as a nice surprise. NPCs belonging to the indigenous Roya tribe look good as well. Interestingly, despite some of them being Startorch Academy students, their civilization is quite reclusive. Their designs fit well with the woods and the various creatures that roam there, excluding the robotic animals, of course. Speaking of creatures, the artists also did a great job with their designs. The robotic enemies that take inspiration from Horizon Zero Dawn are alright, but the highlights are the elite enemies and Hyvatia. The animal designs are very cute too, with penguins and birds dotting the landscape. I especially like the soulless skins as they remind me of the grubs from Hollow Knight. I was surprised to find animals from 1.x in Lynae, but most of them fit in quite well, so that's alright. Overall, the artists did a great job with these designs as they usually do. It would be great if Kuro Games releases plushies of these alongside all the cute creatures they've made so far, not to mention the anniversary cubes. Let's move on to the main quest. Ever since 1.0, I have been very vocal about this game's writing issues and how I think the story could have been altered or improved. It is no secret that the story of Wuthering Wavess has plenty of potential that the end results do not always meet, but 3.0 does a surprisingly good job compared to previous chapters. Regarding the quality of 3.0's first half, I get the impression that most of the effort went into the earlier parts where the rover is in Startorch Academy, because a while after the rover leaves the academy, the pacing and writing quality drops significantly. Certain areas like the Research Institute and characters like Luke, Mornye, and Chisa also didn't get enough screen time. As an introduction, this chapter is very strong. It features Lynae, Mornye, Luke, and a few cool NPCs that serve to introduce different concepts in Lynae, notably the Void Storms, the Fake Sun, Startorch Academy, etc. A lot of time was spent in the academy, which allows for enjoyable interactions between the rover, Lynae, her teachers, and Sigma. As a result, this is my favorite part of 3.0's story. However, probably due to time constraints, this chapter didn't feature some previously marketed playable characters unlike 2.0, which featured all 5. More importantly, this chapter is way shorter than it should be, which means huge pacing issues. But before I get into that, I'd like to bring up something funny, because I don't know where else to put this. For some odd reason, the cassette burning room which must be visited by every new student is in the Research Institute, which is quite far away from the academy. Also, as far as I can tell, there is only one room, the one that the rover uses, so if a class of new students arrives at the institute, it would take them a very long time to get it done because they would have to burn their cassettes one at a time. It's quite ridiculous, really. Alright, now for the pacing issues. Since the story maintains a slow pace when the rover explores Startorch Academy, I thought that the story would be a lot longer than it ended up being. However, the story speeds up significantly after the rover burns his or her cassette, which is why I get the impression that the developers were rushing to get this chapter done by the end. Additionally, this chapter gets very predictable after the court hearing, which is disappointing because everything before this point was the opposite. Throughout the quest, I was excited to see if Lynae had an ulterior motive or something, because she acted highly suspicious whenever she wasn't being actively observed. However, right as Lynae confirms her expulsion due to her stolen identity, I had a feeling that everything would go smoothly after that because I remembered that Wuthering Wavess has a rather light-hearted story and the characters have to adhere to the image that players are sold on. For Lynae, that means she must be a student of some kind, so I guess that she'd save everyone from the Void Worm and be readmitted into Startorch Academy at the end. And although it happened way faster than I expected, the sequence of events was exactly as I had predicted. This level of predictability easily rivals Sumika's fate in 2.8 and it isn't a good look for a main quest that introduces a new region. Also, Lynae's expulsion is completely pointless because there were no consequences that came from it. Lynae doesn't want to take her time in the academy for granted, so if, let's say, she chose to be more obedient after her readmittance, it would at least contribute to some level of growth or maturity. However, she doesn't do that, likely because she needed to stick to the rebellious image that was marketed to us, so her expulsion should have been removed from the script entirely. Regarding believability in character interactions, Lynae suffers from the constraints of this game's story, namely due to deadlines and runtime. She warmed up to the rover in just 2 hours and reveals her entire backstory to someone she just met. This is more of a symptom of the game's story constraints due to its format, which means other characters like Chisa and Lupa suffer from this as well. Though, for some reason, the rover also trusts Lynae after this, even though he or she was suspicious and cold towards her just a while ago. Also, the only characters fighting the Void Worm were Lynae and the rover, which is odd because Startorch Academy is a school for resonators, which means that at least a few teachers and students should be combat capable. It could be because Kuro wanted the featured character to save the day, but either way, it's a weird detail. The second part of the story focuses on Mornye, as expected. Like the first part, it starts off slow-paced and accelerates towards the end. Unlike the first part, it's stronger in terms of writing and pacing. It also integrates the Beata Woods and the Soulless Trees into the main story, though I wish this chapter brought the player to a few more locations. However, I sometimes get the impression that the developers wrote this story for players who may not have played the Soulless Skin exploration quest beforehand, because there were some moments where information was repeated here. As for character interactions, I like the dynamic between Mornye and Lynae as the first part didn't have them interact much, if at all. I only wish we got more of these interactions because the writers immediately wrote her out of the chapter, just so that this story's focus would be on Mornye. A significant portion of the quest is spent investigating a mystery and talking to Roya NPCs that speak like the Peller from The Witcher 3, and in English they sound a lot like the Skelligers from the same game. Just like part 1, the pacing is rather slow here, allowing the player to slowly warm up to Mornye through dialogue. I enjoyed this part of the quest overall. As expected, the player gets to experience combat as Mornye during the quest. Like in 2.6, I wish we got more sections like this because it would let players experience playing as her for a longer period. It is worth noting that the enemies die instantly when they are in the mistuned state, which could be because Mornye is a healer. In gameplay sections featuring Aero rovers such as in 2.4 and 2.6, the enemies had a much lower health pool, which I think is a better option because it's just easier for players to tell when the enemies are close to death. After all, the health bar is much larger and it is bright red. Towards the end, Mornye confronts the guy who was conspiring with the Frexidus. At first, he was presented as a fearful man who wanted to escape from the system in his society, which paints him as a sympathetic antagonist. However, he later became a stereotypical crazy villain which is lame and stupid, so of course Mornye shot him in the face. Returning to the research institute, Mornye outs Professor Warren as a traitor. I was not expecting this because in the first part it seemed that he was just doing his duty despite him being a bit overbearing. But instead of a good guy who happened to be an asshole, we get a traitor that, of course, is an asshole. I'm a bit disappointed here, but I can forgive this instance. If I had to point out one major weakness of this quest is that it uses the Chosen One trope quite blatantly. I don't like this trope because it tends to cheapen the contributions and or efforts of other characters. Wuthering Wavess has always been like this, but it tends to be done in a more measured way, where the trope is reserved for the rover's interactions with the Sentinels. So it is strange that a main quest which takes place in Lahairoi, a region without a Sentinel, uses the Chosen One trope and shoves it in our faces, most notably with scenes featuring the Shaper. Also, a weird observation I had is that since Mornye's balloon legs are battery powered and she can't walk for long periods of time, She'd be sitting on a floating chair for a majority of her appearances. However, Mornye chose to walk for pretty much the entire quest, which doesn't make much sense, especially since she was traveling around the Beata Woods as part of the investigation. A more elegant way to do this would be the rover asking her why she's sitting and floating around all the time, leading her to just explaining it as a matter of fact, instead of having her legs almost give way during the quest itself. Just like the first part as well as most other main quests, this one has a big climax at the end. I think the replacement of Lynae's artificial sun should have taken more time to complete because it looked like a huge deal that required more build-up. Also, this quest took me less than 3 hours to complete, which is disappointing in terms of length. Had the investigation or preparation sections been longer, I would have had a better impression of this chapter, especially when it comes to pacing. Let's move on to the playable characters, starting with Lynae, my dress-up resonator. Overall, I think Lynae is cute and likable, and best of all, she is written very well. She is not a model student, and that's putting it mildly. She skips classes, modifies her bike, ignores the academy's speed limit, and frequently visits the infirmary with made-up illnesses, which makes her charming and relatable. In the region's introduction cutscene, Lynae is immediately introduced with two sides. She is cold and calculating when she is alone, and lively and animated when she is with others. She is also shown to be a terrible liar who struggles to come up with excuses, which comes up multiple times throughout the story, such as during her interactions with the rover, Sigma, and Professor Warren. Although this is played for laughs a couple of times, it actually serves a purpose. In fact, every part of a character has a specific purpose. Her cold attitude reflects her past as a mercenary, her extroversion appears to be an act as she tries to distance herself from her past, and her inability to lie comes back to bite her later in the story. Despite being dragged down by a disappointing main quest, Lynae is likable and compelling on her own. Her character traits, design, and especially performance bring a lot of charm and energy, and I think it was a good choice to have Lynae be the one to introduce players to Lynae. In fact, I think every decent person deserves to have a friend like her. However, since she is in a different class, she'll probably disappear by the next patch, as usual. So that sucks. As for her gameplay, she's quite fun. As far as I can tell, she has 3 states, with each requiring different inputs from the player. Just like Lynae uses the jump button as an attack, which makes her a bit different from most other characters. Also, it seems her heavy attack can be held down for as long as the player has stamina. I didn't obtain her because I already have a Spectral team and her visual design doesn't interest me that much, but I get why she is so popular. Let's move on to Mornye, aka Jinsi 2, aka Shortkeeper. When Mornye is introduced in the first part, it is immediately clear that she remembers the rover but is saddened by the fact that the rover doesn't recognize her. She also sometimes talks about herself like a machine, and her calm demeanor contrasts sharply with Lynae, which makes it surprising that they're quite close to each other. Mornye's main weakness is physical, which is not common in this game. I've already expressed concern over the lack of her floating chair in her main quest, so I won't repeat it here. Aside from her occasional machine-like speech patterns, Mornye's most interesting character trait is her shyness whenever she's not in the classroom. This is understandable and endearing, though I find her to be a bit underdeveloped. In my opinion, Lynae outclasses Mornye in writing, character traits, and performance, while the opposite is true for visual design. As for gameplay, Mornye is very simple. Build orange meter with basic attacks and skill, perform a heavy attack to transition to blue meter, and repeat to cast her orbital laser. Unfortunately, she is not as interesting as Lynae, and I was surprised that she was a healer instead of a main damage dealer. Also, since she is a Jinsi reskin, she wields a greatsword. That boosts energy regen, although her healing is based on her defense stat. I guess the designers didn't want to make another string master. Since I like her visual design more, I chose to get her. After the main quest, I obtained her with 10 pulls on both character and weapon, though I later found out that the character pity was 74 and the weapon pity was 5. Finally, we have Chisa. I deliberately put her in last because I have the most to say about her. To be clear, I like Chisa quite a bit. She's grown on me since I finished her quest in 2.8, and that's partially because of the mascot. However, she was completely fucked over here, which I would never wish upon any character, even the ones I dislike. In 2.8, it is revealed that Chisa had went missing for about 20 years and she set 2 important goals for herself. She wanted to reunite with her parents and continue her studies at Startorch Academy. Like many players, I was looking forward to seeing what would happen next because at the time it seemed that Chisa and/or her parents would be present in Lynae's story. At the beginning of 3.0's main quest, the player can meet Chisa in Startorch Academy where she is talking to another student, which is an optional interaction. Without ceremony, she tells the player that she has met her parents and that it took Rover a few days to appear in the region. This immediately creates a few problems. Firstly, it makes sense that Chisa would immediately look for her parents upon arriving in Lynae, but I think having the rover arrive days later was a deliberate excuse to have the reunion happen off-screen. This immediately reminds me of the portal to Lynae, which was only placed in Honami City so that Kuro could classify 2.8's side quest as a main quest. Secondly, players aren't given the chance to witness this reunion, not even from afar. As stated earlier, it was built up as a big goal, only to be thrown away the moment we meet Chisa in Lynae. This can turn players away from being invested in future characters, as any goals they may have that aren't met during the very same chapter that introduces them will likely be treated like Chisa's was in this patch. This isn't the only complaint I have with how Chisa was treated. Early on, I expected her to participate in 3.0's story alongside Lynae because she was in the perfect place to be a secondary guide for the rover. If Chisa had not been deliberately shafted, there could have been many enjoyable interactions between the three of them. For example, Chisa could say back then things were like this, and the player could understand how much had changed in those 20 or so years. Then, when the rover burns his or her cassette, Chisa could stay behind in the academy, giving Lynae more screen time for the rest of the chapter. At the time, it really seemed that something like this would happen because, of course, Chisa would be included in the story, right? However, it seems that my optimism was misguided yet again. Chisa may still appear in future chapters. After all, we are far from the end of 3.x's story, but I have no expectation that she would even turn up again, save for the final chapter. Chisa is yet another casualty of the gacha-influenced writing of Wuthering Wavess' main story. That is, she got shafted just because she isn't a featured character, just like how Lupa didn't participate in the hunt in 2.6. So far, these two are the worst examples of Kuro games deliberately disrespecting and throwing away their characters for no reason other than the fact that they aren't profitable anymore. These are the very same characters that they tried so hard to sell us in the preceding chapter, which makes it even more jarring. Funnily enough, this trend creates the opposite effect because when players know that almost every new character is likely going to be abandoned soon, or that their goals would be irrelevant anyway, they will be less willing to obtain that character. This is doubly so when the character is featured on a rerun banner. With Cartesia in 2.x, the writers have shown that they can make good use of recurring characters without giving them too much screen time. Maybe by the end of 3.x I can say the same for Chisa and one or two of the new characters, but I'm no longer optimistic. This pattern has gone on long enough and I'm sick of it. Alright, now for the good news, which I have a lot of. Where the writing suffers, the gameplay thrives. This is as much as I can say for 3.0. When talking about Startorch Academy, I've already said that the lack of flight allows players to finally traverse the open world using their movement abilities again. Coming from 2.0, which had players fly everywhere, 3.0's open world experience is a huge improvement. Like the Academy, the open world has quite a number of tools that help the player traverse the landscape a little bit more smoothly. The first is the motorcycle, which was given to players as part of the main quest. As a nice little gesture from the developers, players are given the ability to customize their bike. Thankfully, almost all the livery options are unlockable through side content with only a few paid options. There are also options that come with collaborations with the Sonic and Persona franchises, which are a nice touch. I thought the developers would go further with these collabs, but I guess this is fine too. Along with cosmetic options, players can also upgrade their bike with mod points earned through exploration and side content. This includes speed upgrades and even an increased aggro drop rate for the new region. It's a nice addition as it provides a sense of progression to the exploration experience. For some reason, it can climb inclines of up to 80 or so degrees, making verticality less of an inconvenience. As a result, many have likened it to a Skyrim horse, which is quite fitting. Although it took a while for me to get used to the controls, I found the bike to be very enjoyable. It can boost, drift, double jump, and even be thrown at enemies like Inferno Riders in 1.0. It has an autopilot function tied to a GPS system and allows players to invite other characters, much like the gondolas in 2.0 and the communal saunas in 2.4. It even features a radio that can play a huge variety of songs, which I enjoy quite a lot. though on stream I prefer to let the open world music play as I drive around. In terms of balance, the bike has a stamina system that prevents players from boosting forever, which is alleviated by the presence of roads. Speaking of which, there is a Death Stranding inspired exploration quest that allows the player to rebuild Lynae's highways using resources collected from the open world. Each time the player does this, part of the highway gets rebuilt, and connecting all the parts completes the highway. While the player works on the quest, NPC vehicles will appear on the newly constructed highway. And although they aren't as numerous as I would have liked, they allow for some player interaction, such as stealing supplies from a truck or using a vehicle as a ramp. There is even an achievement for colliding with an NPC, though it is weird that instead of slowing down, they instantly stop when the player is in front of them. Progressing the exploration quest is also highly beneficial to the player because the GPS system makes heavy use of it, and traveling on the highway does not consume stamina. It's also important to note that this quest takes a long time to complete compared to most other quests. I like this because it encourages the player to do other activities and slowly rebuild roads along the way. After all, it would be lame if the player could just rebuild all the sections in under an hour. Overall, I love how this quest is utilized. It gives the open world of Lynae a sense of progression on top of providing players with an overarching goal and rewarding their work with convenience and ease of travel. I couldn't imagine a better way of doing this. However, the highway isn't the only tool that players can use in the new region. When exploring, players can come across and interact with BT, which allows him to throw the player a surprisingly long distance. Rails and grapple points help the player with the verticality of the map, all while staying on the bike. It is worth noting that some titans and rails are tied to smart cube printers, which must be solved to unlock them. These printers contain nice puzzles and remind me of the painting puzzles in 2.x, as in they're not too easy and usually not too difficult. These objects are placed in appropriate areas with just enough space between them, meaning that the player can't just rely on them and must use the bike when necessary. Similarly, the bike can get stuck often and cannot climb inclines greater than 90 degrees, so the player must still dismount from time to time. Overall, there is a very good balance between the player's original movement abilities, the motorcycle, and the open world mechanics. Unlike 1.x, traveling is not too slow, and unlike 2.x, the player can't trivialize the process by flying everywhere. So far, this is the most balanced and enjoyable experience in Wuthering Wavess when it comes to exploration. Finally, before I move on to the other exploration and side quests, I'd like to touch on map markers again. I've already explained why turning the map into a checklist is an issue, so I won't go into detail here. While it's kind of disappointing to see Lynae have so many map markers from the beginning, I can see why they did this for entities such as Soulless skins, which are small and difficult to find without the markers. As for the chests, I'm kind of mixed. While I dislike not needing to find chests myself, I can appreciate that at least the designers committed to and went all the way with convenience, giving players a mid-air scanner that instantly opens all the chests. Just like all other regions, Lynae features lots of exploration and side quests in the open world. Here are some that I'd like to talk about. When the player starts rebuilding the highways, they'll receive a secondary exploration quest that sees them rebuilding the Space Shack Observatory. I chose to do this quest after finishing the entire highway, and I was surprised that the observatory had way more content than I thought. This quest explores the Lynae, a cute popular NPC that uses a robot to communicate for her. In contrast to the slower highway quest, this plays out like any other exploration quest, which is fine. The Lynae regains her speech as the observatory gets fully rebuilt, and there's even a follow-up quest where she goes stargazing with other students, which is completely unnecessary but very much welcome. After rebuilding the observatory, the player gains access to a feature that allows them to change the weather, a unique mechanic in Lynae. Also, I like the aesthetic of the observatory as the color palette and design language closely match those of Startorch Academy. Overall, this quest is interesting and I enjoyed it quite a lot. Towards the southwest of Startorch Academy, players can come across an exploration quest featuring several Soulless skins named after musical notes. It looked unremarkable to me at first, but collecting all of them completes a song which sets free a number of massive, jet-powered stingrays that can be found flying around after the quest is complete. It is worth noting that Lynae is present for a follow-up quest, which includes a nice cutscene where she sits on top of a jet ray and takes in the scenery. Speaking of Soulless skins, my favorite exploration quest in 3.0 is Where Light Takes Shape, which heavily feature them. Like part 2 of the main quest, it has the Soulless skins return to the soulless trees in the sky as part of their life cycle, except there's no villain trying to disrupt it. I found out earlier in a separate side quest that Soulskins are reincarnated humans, and this quest builds upon that. Here, Soulskins are stated to be born with their memories intact, except this one, which is why it wants to go on a journey to restore its memories. Towards the end, the game asks an insightful question about this topic, which relates to the rover. Unfortunately, this is never brought up again, not even as a dialogue option in part 2 of the main quest. In terms of gameplay, it's somewhat different, as it has the player find and gather Soulskins to activate mechanisms in the Soulless trees. Earlier, I said that they can be difficult to spot in the open world, and it also applies here. At the end, the player is given a celebration and a musical platforming section, which is quite adorable. This exploration quest is great in terms of quality and uniqueness, though I've heard that it was quite buggy for some people. If there is a side quest that I believe should have been an exploration quest, it's this one. It's a short quest that sees the player lighting up some of the patterns on the aforementioned rock faces, letting them stand out among the landscape, especially at night. It's not often that side quests permanently change the environments. Whether this one was classified wrongly, it makes the world look a bit better, so I'd recommend completing it. There is a quest line that has the player investigating a few places rumored to harbor paranormal activity. This questline consists of multiple separate quests that feature a spooky tunnel, a boss fight, and an inverted racetrack, among others. It looks out of place because Lynae is a place of scientific learning, but it does provide some contrast. Since it's just a series of side quests, I'm neutral on this tonal difference. At some point, I also came across a side quest that has me interacting with various smart cube printers, which surprised me with standees of not only Chisa but of Mornye and Lynae as well. I wasn't expecting the new characters to have standees, as Chisa's was just a cafe decoration in 2.8. Still, I kind of like them as they're a nice treat for players who explore a lot or choose to do a lot of side content. With the release of 3.x, Kuro Games implemented the tune break mechanic, which every character can use. Basically, tune break is separate from vibration, but they kind of work in the same way. While depleting an enemy's vibration gauge stuns them for a lengthy period, filling up the tune break gauge allows the player to cast a tune break skill at any time, interrupting a target and forcing it into a stun animation. The trade-off is that enemies move more often, attack more often, and many of their moves cannot be interrupted normally. Their HP values would also increase significantly. These changes were probably made to balance out the player's longer attack windows in order to heavily encourage the use of this mechanic. Even before fighting any bosses, I've noticed this issue when facing elite enemies in the open world, where it's common to fight multiple of them alongside normal enemies. If they were fought alone, it would be more enjoyable and manageable, but it seems that many of them were placed in pairs or groups. Also, for some reason, elite enemies take very little damage from tune breaks, which barely counteracts their bloated HP. It is worth noting that Lynae does extra spectral damage when she casts her tune break, and Mornye increases off-tune build-up rate, which could be a case of create a problem, sell the solution, but I think it's too early to say for sure. I hope I'm wrong in this regard. Finally, for gameplay, I'd like to touch on the WavesLine app. It's just a messaging system that allows for more low-effort character interactions. It sounds like a good idea, but my impressions are mixed. While 3.0's main quest incorporates the messaging app pretty well, especially with Lynae, the same cannot be said for other characters, especially since the feature can be used as an excuse to keep characters from appearing on screen. The most notable character that has been affected so far is Chisa, and I predict that Lynae and Mornye could be subject to this in the future. This system doubles down on my already sour opinion of Kuro treating its characters as mere commodities to be sold instead of actual characters that players are supposed to care about. Additionally, for players who have been through the entire story, it's weird to see so many new messages from older characters that look like they were sent just after their quests were completed. In my case, the oldest quest was completed over a year ago, so I guess my rover forgot to reply to these characters for just as long. It's an odd and funny observation. Overall, WavesLine is nice, but should be used sparingly. It has some good features such as the Space Trek Collective sending messages whenever the player rebuilds a new section of the highway, or NPCs sending messages to tell the player where to go during side quests, but it's also being used as an excuse to sideline characters, which is annoying. Of course, Wuthering Wavess wouldn't be Wuthering Wavess without a ton of bugs and optimization issues. Again, regarding optimization, I'm in no position to go into detail because I don't experience much of these, but I'll once again urge Kuro Games to just stop releasing new shit for a while and fix what's already there. It doesn't look good when every new patch breaks a few more things and players on all platforms continue to suffer from the game's poor optimization. Now, I'll list some of the bugs that I've come across. Firstly, I noticed a problem with rendering in the research institutes. I don't think this is related to draw distance because I went further away and they stayed on screen. In the open world, there are some spots where lighting and shadows look completely broken, such as in the train station and on this bridge right here. There was also at least one instance where a background prop was rendered with a low frame rate despite not being that far away. When I drove into or out of the Beata Woods, I could clearly see the area loading and disappearing, which isn't a good look. The designers should have made the entrance tunnel curved to hide this, as many games tend to do. When riding with Lynae in the main quest and when exploring the open world, I found that whenever I use the bike, it seems that there is a chance that motion blur would automatically activate despite the settings showing me that it's off. I always had to manually turn it on and off again to fix this. When turning in collected Soli skins, I came across this funny bug where a piece of blank text would be attached to some of them. I've heard that this is an Unreal Engine issue, and since I've had some experience with the engine in school, I'm inclined to agree. Finally, there was one instance where I couldn't fast travel, and I thought it was a simple bug. However, it was a very delayed teleport, which put me under the map. For every bug I bring up here, there could be 5 or others, and it doesn't bode well for this game if it keeps going on and on, especially since this has been going on since Septimons was introduced in 2.4, and that was about half a year ago. Overall, Lahairoi is the best region I've had the pleasure of viewing and exploring in Wuthering Wavess. Although I'm disappointed that some of the issues I brought up time and time again are still present, especially the ones regarding the story, I acknowledge that the game has come a long way and the developers deserve praise for their hard work. Overall, 3.0 has mostly been great, and I've tried my best to explain exactly what made it so successful and what could have been improved or rather changed entirely. Honestly, I wish Kuro would learn their lessons from 2.x, but whatever. I can sometimes tolerate bad writing if the rest of the game is good. For now, Wuthering Wavess is one such game. Alright, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.